As some of you may know, Karl Barth was one of the most important theologians in the 20th century. Well, one day, Karl Barth was riding the streetcar in his hometown of Basel, Switzerland, and he noticed that in the seat next to him was a man holding a map and a guidebook, obviously a tourist. So Karl Barth turned to the man and asked, "Is this your first time in our city?" And the man said, "Why, yes. Yes, it is. I've never been to Basel before." So Karl Barth asked him, "Is there anything special you'd like to see while you're here?" And the man said, "Yes, there is. I understand that the famous theologian Karl Barth lives in this city. I'd very much like to meet him. Do you know him?" Karl Barth replied, "Well, yes, I do. Every morning I give him a shave." Later that day, that tourist returned to the hotel and announced, "Today, I met Karl Barth's barber." When someone or something is right there in front of us, do we always see it? Come and see what God has done. That is what this psalm invites us to do. Come and see what God has done. To begin with, this psalm invites us to come and see what God did long ago in ages past. In particular, we're invited to come and see the marvelous and amazing things God did to free the Hebrew slaves from Egypt. How God parted the waters of the sea so that they could escape from the oncoming chariots. And how God was with the people through all their ups and downs, through hunger, thirst, threat of attack, rebellion, and so much more throughout those 40 years, until they eventually arrived at that land that God had promised to give them, a land described as flowing with milk and honey. But what's more, this psalm also invites us to come and see how that old story of what God did long ago is a story that continues even now. And so we're invited to come and see how God has been at work in our history and in our time. So today, let's come and see what God has done during the past 125 years in the life of Crafton United Presbyterian Church. 1885. That was the year that this church was first officially organized. In 1885, Grover Cleveland was president. There were only 38 states back then. Mark Twain had just published The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn the year before, and the Statue of Liberty would not arrive in New York Harbor until the following year. But even though the First Presbyterian Church of Crafton was officially organized in 1885, its roots go back at least 2 years beyond that. You see, according to the church record books, which we still have from the 1800s, we find that in 1883, the Reverend Philip Jennings, the pastor of the Mount Pisgah Presbyterian Church in Green Tree, agreed to come over here to Crafton on Sunday afternoons to lead a Sunday school. And according to the church records, those initial gatherings took place in a schoolhouse on Crafton Boulevard near the Davis drugstore. This week I found out from church member Elaine Crisp, who says that she was not a customer of that drugstore until a couple years after 1883. But that drugstore was located just across Black's Bridge on the left-hand side where a dentist's office is today. So somewhere in that vicinity was a schoolhouse where people from Crafton gathered every Sunday afternoon, at first for a Sunday school and eventually for worship services. But the church records say that interest in that church grew so rapidly that very soon they were no longer able to fit inside that schoolhouse, and they decided that they needed to construct a church building. A few years later, in 1905, others here in Crafton organized the Bradford Avenue United Presbyterian Church. After initially meeting in the Borough Building, those church members bought the land that we are currently situated on and constructed the original part of this church, the part of our church today that's located beyond the front walls of our sanctuary. And the records say that those church members donated more than $25,000 in 1905 to buy the land and to build that church, which in today's dollars means that they donated more than $600,000. Over the years, according to the records, the Presbyterian churches here in Crafton faced their share of hardships and difficulties. For example, consider this entry that was made in the session minutes on April 18, 1887. Promiscuous dancing, and in general, a preference for the pleasures of this world rather than those of religion, have hindered some from deciding for the church. On reading that, I sort of chuckled to myself. It made me wonder what promiscuous dancing looked like in 1887. And if those people from 1887 saw some of the dancing that goes on today, they would probably have heart attacks and drop over dead on the spot. But just like today, we have concerns and wonder why so many people around us don't seem to be interested in matters of faith. Well, those were the same questions and issues that they were struggling with back in the 1880s. And of course, our church, like virtually every church, has faced its share of hardships from petty bickering. For instance, in 1964, the session had a prolonged meeting to deal with complaints from the congregation over the fact that when the choir sang, they didn't all start at the same time, and they did not enunciate the words of the songs very clearly. I guess that means that our current choir members better watch themselves, or they might end up getting written off in our church. But perhaps the biggest and hardest period in this church's history was during the 1960s, when the First Presbyterian Church of Crafton and the Bradford Avenue United Presbyterian Church spent the better part of that decade trying to work